Hello, this is Alex Ramsey, host of Night of the Batman, with a review of the next episode, P.O.V. Let me first preface this by saying I really like this episode, and this is going to be probably a pretty long review, so if you tune in looking for another one of my short reviews, this probably is not going to be it. Okay, let's just first get started with overall just my impressions of it before I begin the actual review. The reason why I really like this episode is because, one, it breaks what had become the standard formula for the past few episodes of having Batman, like having an opening fight, having Batman fight somebody, defeat a villain, and all the other characters remain largely in the background. This one is different. This one starts at the end of a failed police sting operation, and it goes from there. It focuses more on the police, which I think is really cool. They haven't done that. It's sort of, if you've ever read the book Gotham Central, which focuses mainly on the GCPD, which doesn't happen a lot, it's basically like what that is. And also, it's just, we don't get to see a lot of them. We get to see, sure, like little clips of them, but this episode is mainly about them, with Batman remaining largely in the background for most of the episode. Another thing I also like is the flashbacks and them telling their stories to the guy they're having to explain themselves to, and just them piecing it together. It's really cool, and also it's a tiny bit of a mystery too. It's a good episode all around. It's different, which is good for people that were getting tired of the same old formula. I'm not saying I was, but it is a welcome change. And I'm glad that this is one of the only times I think they did it. This isn't the only time that someone has used the whole point of view thing with a Batman story. It's my understanding that that's happened many times, and I'll get to that later on in the actual review. Okay, let's start with the review. Now, let me start, like I always do, with a brief summary of this episode. Now, it starts out, like I said earlier, with Montoya and, I forget the other character's name is, he's a rookie, arriving at the scene and Bullock being passed out. Then it cuts later on to them each telling their own versions of the story, and I like this because it actually cuts and shows what actually happened, even when someone like Bullock is telling a tall tale. And also, they eventually get their badges taken away because their stories match up, and the guy is obviously just trying to get their badges from them, and he's just not being fair. So they get their badges taken away from them, and then Montoya finds out what they were talking about, the dock and the half-cock thing earlier. It's actually a coordinates, a location that one of the gangsters was talking about earlier. So she finds him. Batman happens to be there. She ends up helping Batman, and they each get their badges back for stopping the criminals. Now, I know that before I've said that I hate when villains are weak, because that really destroys the story. But I think for this one, the villain was largely in the background, and that's the way it should have been. And it was just a gang member. It wasn't anyone special. And I think that was perfect for the story, because if it was, say, someone like the Joker, that would take the focus off of the main story, off of the police, and that would put it on him, which that would make the whole story not as good. So you needed a sort of a villain in the background, and it worked for this story. Unlike other stories, this is one time when I think it actually worked in favor of the story instead of the other way around. So, before I go with the pros, let me just first off start by saying, if you've ever seen Batman Gotham Knight, they do something very similar to this, which I like, because it is made by the same people that make this episode and made this series, except they do something sort of different. It's each of them seeing a different version of Batman, which a lot of fans do, and that's kind of interesting too. But it sort of has the same thing where they'll be sitting around and telling a story, and it's actually, like I said earlier, a metaphor sort of for how fans see Batman. Some like the dark and serious, some like the light and campy one, and some like a mix between the two. I like sort of a mix between the two, although sometimes I prefer the darker version, but it just depends, I guess. And also, yeah, that's just interesting, a little interesting fact I thought I'd bring up. I really like when they do point of view stories like this. I find those really interesting, to break the usual narrative structure by doing stories like this and seeing it from other characters' perspective is really cool. Now to the pros. 1, the story. The story is fresh and new and not the same old formula that they've been going with, like I said earlier. Also, I liked, just like I said earlier, the flashbacks, and overall the story, the art, and everything was top notch. It was really good. And I can't really complain about anything in this episode. But I guess I'll have to find something. Okay, the cons. I honestly can't think of anything. That's how good I think this episode is. There's not really, well, maybe Batman being caught is sort of an unbelievable thing, because being caught by some goons is kind of questionable for Batman. Yeah, so I don't think I can find any other problems with it. I really like this episode. I just generally like stuff when they do point of view stuff. Like I said earlier, I find it very interesting. This is just an interesting episode because it has a mystery, but the mystery, once you sort of piece it together kind of quickly. I guess that's a minor gripe, but it doesn't detract at all from the episode. And yeah, I like them putting Batman in the background, because most of the time in these episodes, he's in the forefront of all of them, which is, it's just nice to have a difference. So, I guess if I were to rate this episode, it would be, on my 5-point system, it would be a 4.5 out of 5. This episode is amazing. It's fresh and new, and it's a great story with a kind of good mystery, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I suggest it to you, and I hope you watch it. It's a very good episode. Sorry if I talk too long. I just really like this episode, and a lot to say about it. I hope if you have any opinions about anything, you leave it in the comments below. As always, I enjoyed doing this, and guess that's about it. So long.